The loudest man in the room has already lost. He does not know it yet. His voice is climbing. His face is red. His hands are cutting the air like he is trying to win an argument with weather. Everyone in that room is watching him. And in the corner, someone is not moving, not smiling, not sneering, just breathing, slow, even, almost bored. That person has not said a word in 3 minutes, and somehow, without saying anything, they are the only one in the room who still has power. Here is the part nobody wants to hear. The person who controls your anger controls every decision you make after that. Every text you regret sending, every deal you lost, every relationship you burned to the ground. It started the same way. Someone found the string, and they pulled it, and you danced. You called it standing up for yourself. It was closer to being operated by remote control. Machiavelli spent his life studying men who held power and men who lost it, and he noticed something almost nobody talks about. It was never the strongest man in the room who survived the longest. It was the one who could be provoked and not moved. Generals who won wars did it. Negotiators who talked gunmen down from ledges do it. And by the end of this video, you are going to learn the single discipline that every one of them shares, the one lesson that separates a person who reacts from a person who rules the room. Stay until the end, because that lesson is the one that changes everything else you just heard. Picture this. You are standing in a meeting, or a family dinner, or a parking lot, and someone humiliates you in front of people whose opinion you care about. Your heart is suddenly a drum. Your face is hot. Every cell in your body is screaming at you to answer, to defend, to strike back with words sharp enough to draw blood. This is the moment that decides everything, not the insult itself. What you do in the 4 seconds after it. Behavioral researchers who study crisis negotiators found something the negotiators themselves already knew instinctively. The experts do not separate themselves from amateurs by talking more skillfully. They separate themselves by talking less, and by listening through the silence that follows a provocation, instead of rushing to fill it. Federal hostage negotiators are trained to hold a pause of at least 4 full seconds after a hostile statement before responding. 4 seconds does not sound like much until you try to sit inside it while someone is screaming at you. It feels like standing in the blast radius of a bomb that has not gone off yet, but that silence is not weakness. It is the most aggressive thing you can do to a person who is trying to bait you. Because when you refuse to fill the silence, they have to. And what fills a silence a person cannot stand is almost always the truth. Chris Voss, the former lead FBI hostage negotiator, built an entire career on this. He called it dynamic inactivity. Silence used on purpose, at the right second, to make the other person's own words hang in the air until they hear how they sound. People do not calm down because you explained why they should. They calm down because nobody answered the challenge, and a challenge with no target starts to look ridiculous, even to the person who threw it. There is a nervous system reason this works, and it has nothing to do with willpower. When a person feels emotionally labeled, when their anger is acknowledged instead of matched, there is a measurable drop in the activity of the amygdala, the part of the brain that runs the fight or flight response. Silence paired with calm attention does something similar from the other direction. It denies the aggressor's nervous system the fuel it is hunting for. An angry brain is looking for a mirror. Give it a wall instead, and it eventually runs out of momentum, because rage was never built to sustain itself against nothing. Machiavelli understood a version of this 500 years before neuroscience had a name for it. He wrote about fortune as a violent river, one that floods the plains and tears down buildings when it rises. But he made a crucial distinction. The damage a river does is not fixed. A prince who builds dams and levees before the flood arrives can survive a disaster that would destroy an unprepared man completely. Your anger, in the exact moment someone insults you, is that river. It is going to rise whether you like it or not. The only question Machiavelli would ask is whether you built your dam before the water came, or whether you are standing in an open field, arms out, daring the flood to take you with it. This is the part almost nobody trains for. We spend years learning what to say. We spend almost no time learning what to withhold, and withholding, done at the right second, is not passive. It is the single most controlled, most deliberate act available to a human being under pressure. Ask yourself honestly, who has the power in a confrontation? The person whose mouth is moving, or the person who is still deciding? Silence is not the absence of a move. Silence is the move. Watch a courtroom sometime, or better, watch the footage of one. The lawyers who unsettle a hostile witness the most are rarely the ones who shout. They ask a question, and then they simply wait, sometimes for an uncomfortable stretch of seconds, letting the witness's own silence do the work that a follow-up question never could. Judges do the same thing from the bench. A single raised eyebrow, followed by nothing, can do more to correct a lawyer's behavior than any objection. Power. In almost every high-stakes room you can imagine, a courtroom, a negotiation, a hostage situation, belongs disproportionately to whoever is comfortable letting a silence stretch past the point where it starts to feel unbearable. Discomfort is not a sign that silence is failing. Discomfort is the silence working exactly as intended on the person who cannot stand it. There is a physical component to this that is worth understanding, because it explains why the technique feels so hard the first few times you try it. Your body, in the heat of a confrontation, is flooded with the same stress chemistry it would produce facing a physical threat. Your breathing shortens. Your muscles prepare to act. Every instinct built into you over hundreds of thousands of years is screaming that stillness equals danger. Which means the discipline of staying quiet in that moment is not a personality trait some people are simply born with. It is closer to holding your hand steady over an open flame. It gets easier only because you trained it, not because it ever stops being uncomfortable. The people who look effortlessly calm under pressure are not calm. They are simply more practiced at overriding the same alarm bells everyone else is hearing. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable. Because the next instinct almost everyone has is even more dangerous than losing your temper. It is the instinct to explain yourself. Someone accuses you of something unfair. Maybe a coworker implies you botched a project you actually saved. Maybe a stranger online twists something you said into something you never meant. Your first instinct is to correct the record, to lay out, point by point, exactly why they are wrong and you are right. It feels responsible. It feels like defending your name. It is usually the worst thing you can do. Watch what happens to anyone who tries to over-explain themselves in front of an audience. Their sentences get longer. Their voice gets higher. They start adding details nobody asked for. Timelines, justifications, side stories meant to prove their character. And the people watching do not conclude that this person is innocent. They conclude the opposite. Research into how observers judge defensive behavior shows a consistent pattern. The more elaborate and urgent someone's self-defense becomes, the more the audience reads guilt into it, regardless of the actual facts. Innocence in the court of a watching room rarely needs 3 paragraphs. Guilt almost always reaches for one more sentence than it needed. There is a psychological mechanism underneath this that has nothing to do with whether you actually did anything wrong. When your self-image feels threatened, your brain treats the threat the same way it would treat a physical one. It floods you with urgency. That urgency is what makes you talk fast, add unnecessary detail, and chase an accusation down every hallway it runs through. But urgency reads as fear to anyone watching, and fear reads as guilt, fairly or not. The tragedy is that most people who get destroyed by an accusation were never destroyed by the accusation itself. They were destroyed by their own performance of defending against it. You have almost certainly seen this play out online, where the trap is even sharper because the audience is larger, and the record never disappears. Someone posts a single misleading sentence about a person, and that person responds with 6 paragraphs, screenshots, timestamps, a defense assembled with the thoroughness of a legal brief. Watch what happens in the comments underneath it. People rarely read all 6 paragraphs. What they absorb is the shape of the reaction, 6 paragraphs of visible urgency, and the shape alone becomes the story, regardless of whether the content of those paragraphs was completely accurate. The original accusation, often thin and easily dismissed on its own, gets validated by nothing more than the size of the response it provoked. A single calm sentence, or no response at all, would have starved that accusation of the oxygen it needed to spread in the first place. Machiavelli's writing is full of blunt physical metaphors for exactly this trap, and one of the sharpest is the image of a man who draws his sword every time someone mocks him. A sword drawn for no real threat does not make a man look dangerous. It makes him look unstable, and worse, it tells everyone watching exactly where his weak point is, because now they know which words make him reach for the blade. The next person who wants to provoke him simply says the same thing again, softer this time, and watches the sword come out on command. He has taught his enemies how to control him for free. This is the trap of defending your reputation against every slight. Every time you explain yourself to someone who was never arguing in good faith, you teach them exactly which words control you. You hand them the remote, and then act surprised when they use it. Abraham Lincoln understood this instinct so well that he built a private ritual around it. When someone infuriated him, a general who disobeyed orders, a politician who insulted him publicly, he would sit down and write them a furious, detailed letter. He would say everything he actually wanted to say, every accusation, every justified insult, laid out in full, and then he would fold the letter, put it in a drawer, and never send it. Historians later found dozens of these letters among his papers, addressed, written in full, and never mailed. Lincoln was not suppressing his anger. He was giving it somewhere to go that was not the other person's hands. He got the exact same emotional release you get from confronting someone, without ever handing his opponent the information, the tone, or the ammunition that a real confrontation would have given away for free. Think about what that habit actually did for him. It let him feel the full force of the insult privately, where it could not be used against him, and then walk into the next public meeting with that same man as if nothing had happened, calm, unreadable, and completely in control of what information he was giving away. Nobody who received one of Lincoln's silences ever knew how close they had come to receiving one of his letters instead. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment, because it is easy to miss the first time you hear it. Silence is not the same thing as submission, and refusing to explain yourself is not the same thing as accepting a lie. There is a difference between declining to perform your innocence for an audience that has already decided what it wants to believe, and quietly building the actual case with actual evidence that you present later on your own timeline to the people whose judgment genuinely matters. Machiavelli never told princes to be passive. He told them to be patient, which is a completely different animal wearing a similar coat. So if defending yourself out loud, in the moment in front of the crowd, is usually a losing move, what do you do instead? You stop asking the question that is destroying you. Almost everyone under attack asks themselves the same thing, over and over, in a loop that gets tighter the longer the confrontation lasts. Why is this happening to me? Why did they say that? Why do they hate me? That question feels natural, and it is also a trap, because it keeps you locked inside the identity of a victim. A victim is reactive by definition. A victim's entire emotional state is decided by someone else's behavior. There is a different question available, and it changes everything the second you ask it instead. Not why are they attacking me, but what do they want? That single shift moves you from the position of a wounded party to the position of an analyst. And an analyst is not an easy person to manipulate, because an analyst is watching for information instead of drowning in feeling. Think about what an insult actually is mechanically. Nobody launches an attack from a position of total security. People who feel completely secure do not need to diminish anyone. An attack, almost every single time, is a signal that the attacker feels threatened, outmatched, embarrassed, or afraid of losing something: status, control, an audience's respect, their own self-image. The loud coworker who mocks your idea in a meeting is very often terrified that your idea is better than his. The stranger who attacks you online with disproportionate anger is very often working through something that has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with a life where they feel powerless everywhere else. This is not an excuse for their behavior. It is intelligence about their behavior, and intelligence is a weapon you can actually use. Watch a genuinely secure, genuinely powerful person get challenged sometime. Their body barely moves. Their voice does not rise. They ask a question instead of mounting a defense. Now watch an insecure person get challenged. The tells come fast, and they come everywhere at once. The voice climbing in pitch, the pointing finger, the sentences that trail into repetition, because the brain is working faster than the mouth can keep up. Aggression that loud is rarely a display of strength. Far more often, it is a nervous system trying to convince a room, and itself, of something it does not actually believe. Picture a manager who publicly criticizes an employee's work in front of the entire team, louder and longer than the mistake actually warrants. The easy read is that the manager holds all the power in that room. The strategist read is different. Ask what that manager wants, instead of why they are attacking, and a very different picture appears. Maybe their own numbers are behind target, and they need a visible scapegoat before the next review. Maybe they were criticized themselves an hour earlier by someone above them. And this is the closest available outlet for a feeling they cannot direct upward. None of this excuses the behavior, and none of it means you should simply absorb it forever. but it changes what you do next. A victim spends the rest of the day replaying the humiliation. A strategist spends 5 minutes gathering information and then spends the rest of the day deciding, calmly, what to actually do with it, whether that means a private conversation later, a documented record, or simply the decision to stop being an easy target for someone else's fear. This is the strategist's advantage. The moment you stop asking why me and start asking what do they want, you stop being the target of the confrontation and become the person quietly running it. You are no longer trying to survive the encounter. You are studying it. If you have been sitting with this so far and thinking about the last time someone got under your skin, good. Because the rest of this is where it stops being theory and starts being something you can use the next time it happens. And it will happen again, probably sooner than you think. Here is a reframe that tends to stay with people long after the rest of this fades. Every confrontation you will ever walk into is secretly an interview, not one you signed up for, and not one where you are necessarily the one asking questions, but an interview in the sense that both people are, whether they realize it or not, revealing exactly who they are under pressure. And the person who talks the least in that interview is almost always the person who learns the most. There is a simple, brutal logic to this that most people never think about consciously. Every sentence you speak is information you are giving away. Every word your opponent speaks under pressure is information they are giving away. In any exchange of information, the person who talks the least, while paying the most attention, walks away knowing more than they revealed. This is not a personality trait. It is math. Poker players understand this on a level that goes beyond cards. A player who cannot control their face when they get a strong hand is called a tell. And every experienced opponent at the table is not watching the cards, they are watching the face. Because the face tells the truth faster than the mouth can lie. A confrontation works the same way, except the tells are not just facial. They are verbal. A person who cannot stop talking under pressure is handing you information about what actually scares them, what they actually want, and where their actual weak points are. One sentence at a time, for free. Picture two people across a negotiating table or across a kitchen counter during an argument that started over something small and grew into something else. One of them is talking fast, adding justifications, circling back to defend a point nobody attacked yet. The other is watching, saying almost nothing, occasionally repeating back a single phrase the first person just used. That repetition is not an accident, and it is not just a listening technique. Trained negotiators use it on purpose, taking the last few words someone said and turning them into a question, because it costs the listener nothing, and it makes the talker keep going, keep revealing, keep handing over the one resource that never comes back once it is spent, which is information about what they actually want. By the end of that conversation, one person knows almost everything about the other, and the other person knows almost nothing in return. That imbalance is not luck. It is the direct result of who decided to keep their cards face down. This is why the calmest person in a heated room is so often mistaken for the least powerful one, right up until the moment everyone realizes they were the only one who came away from the conversation with anything useful. Loud people spend their energy performing dominance. Quiet, attentive people spend their energy gathering intelligence. Only one of those things is still useful to you tomorrow. There is something almost nobody says out loud about this. and it is worth pausing on. The habit of staying quiet under pressure is not really about the other person at all. In the end, it is a form of respect you owe yourself. The decision that your own information, your own next move, is worth more than the temporary satisfaction of a clever comeback. Every comeback you have ever regretted felt necessary in the second you said it. It rarely feels necessary the next morning. The version of you that stays silent and watches is not the version that feels weaker later. It is almost always the version that feels like it kept something valuable that the loud version would have given away. If any of this is landing, and you have caught yourself in one of these exact situations before, that is exactly why this channel exists. To keep pulling these patterns apart, one confrontation at a time. So subscribe now, because the next lesson builds directly on this one. And it is the part most people never figure out on their own. Machiavelli's most famous image is not about silence at all, at first glance. It is about a river. He describes fortune as one of those violent, destructive rivers that floods the plains when it rages, tearing down buildings, moving earth from one place to another, and everyone flees before it, because in the moment of the flood, nothing can stop it. But he does not end the metaphor there, and this is the part people forget. The flood is only unstoppable for the person who did nothing beforehand. A prince who builds dams and levees while the weather is calm can survive the exact same flood that destroys everyone around him. Apply that to a human confrontation, and the metaphor stops being about politics and starts being uncomfortably personal. The insult, the accusation, the sudden ambush of anger from someone across the table, that is the flood. It is going to come. You do not get to choose whether other people provoke you. What you get to choose is whether you spent the calm weather beforehand, building something that holds. People who fall apart in confrontations were very rarely destroyed by that specific confrontation. They were destroyed by having never practiced holding still under smaller pressure. So when the real flood came, there was nothing built to stop it. This is also why Machiavelli, writing about rulers and not therapists, still landed on something close to emotional strategy, without ever using that language. He noted that fear is a more reliable emotion to build on than love, precisely because fear tends to stay constant, while affection is fickle and shifts with circumstance. There is a version of this that applies to your own inner world, not just to how others feel about you. The parts of your character you can rely on under pressure are the parts you deliberately reinforced when nothing was testing them. Confidence you only feel when things are calm is not confidence, it is decoration. The dam has to be built before the river rises, or it is not a dam, it is a wish. Modern culture tells you the opposite of almost everything in this video. Speak your truth. Express yourself fully. Do not hold anything back. There is real value buried inside that advice, in the right context, with the right person, at the right time, but applied indiscriminately to every provocation from every stranger and every bad faith attacker. It becomes a trap disguised as liberation. Every unfiltered reaction you hand a hostile audience is a piece of yourself they did not earn and cannot be trusted with. Expression is not the same thing as exposure. A prince who told every rival exactly what he felt in every moment would not have survived a single season in Renaissance Italy, and a modern person who does the same thing rarely survives a single confrontation with their advantage intact. Full expression has its place. It is not owed to everyone who provokes you, and pretending otherwise has cost more people their leverage than almost any other piece of popular advice in circulation right now. So the practical question is not, how do I become someone who never gets provoked? Nobody manages that, and anyone who tells you they do is either lying or so disconnected from their own feelings that it should worry you, not impress you. The practical question is, what dam am I building right now, in this calm stretch of my life, that will hold the next time someone tries to flood me on purpose? Most people build nothing during the calm, because the calm does not feel urgent. That is exactly why the calm is the only time the dam can actually get built. Nobody starts constructing a levee while the water is already at their knees. The version of you that stays composed during a real confrontation was assembled somewhere else entirely, through a private rehearsal that happened long before the actual test arrived. Generals who kept their composure on a battlefield were not improvising in the moment. They had spent years studying exactly how chaos behaves, so that when it finally arrived in front of them, it looked familiar instead of overwhelming. The same principle applies at a much smaller scale. The version of you capable of staying still under a real provocation is built by deciding, in advance, how you intend to respond the next time someone tries to bait you, and then rehearsing that response in your head until it is closer to memory than to willpower. None of that looks like discipline from the outside. It looks like nothing happening. But nothing happening, repeated enough times, is precisely how a dam gets built one layer at a time, quietly. Long before the flood ever asks for it, there is one more weapon left, and it might be the most underused tool in this entire discussion, because it does something the others do not. Silence protects you. Refusing to over-explain protects you. Asking what they want instead of why me protects you. But this next move does not just protect you. It actively takes the pressure that was aimed at you and redirects it back at the person who aimed it, without you ever raising your voice. The move is a single question, asked at exactly the right moment, not a defense, not a counterattack, a question. Something as simple as, what made you say that? Or, help me understand what you mean by that. It sounds almost too small to matter, and that is exactly why it works. Researchers studying curiosity and conflict have found something that surprises most people the first time they hear it. Individuals who respond to provocation with a genuine question, rather than a matching level of aggression, consistently report and display lower levels of hostility in the exchange that follows, and this pattern holds even when the other person has already been rude or hurtful. One striking study found that people who prepared a single curious question before a tense conversation, instead of preparing a rebuttal, were seen by their conversation partner as more open-minded and more reasonable, and the partner became measurably more interested in continuing the relationship afterward. A single question did more relational work than an entire argument would have. Here is why the mechanism works on a person who is actively attacking you. An accusation demands a defense. That is the shape the aggressor expects, and their entire emotional momentum is built around receiving one, because a defense confirms they landed a hit. A question demands something completely different. It demands that the attacker explain themselves. And most people who are attacking out of raw emotion have never actually thought through why they are attacking. They are running on momentum, not on reasoning. The instant you ask them to explain their own logic, you force their brain to switch from the emotional, reactive gear into the analytical, explaining gear, And those two gears cannot run at full speed at the same time. You are not diffusing their anger by fighting it. You are diffusing it by making it answer a question it was never built to answer. This is the reversal Machiavelli would have appreciated instantly, because it takes the exact tool the aggressor was using against you, pressure, and hands it back to them with their name on it. You are no longer the person justifying yourself. They are. Notice what this move requires of you, though, because it is not free. You cannot ask what made you say that in a tone that drips with sarcasm and expect it to land as curiosity. The nervous system on the other end of that question can tell the difference between genuine curiosity and a weapon wearing curiosity's clothes almost instantly. And if it senses the weapon, the whole technique collapses into just another form of the fight you were trying to avoid. The question only works if some part of you actually means it. If you are genuinely willing to hear the answer, instead of simply waiting for your turn to strike. This is the same discipline running underneath everything else in this video. The tools are not tricks you perform on people. They are a way of actually being less controlled by the moment. And the control other people lose in front of you is simply a side effect of that. Try it the next time someone comes at you with an accusation dressed up as an attack. Do not defend. Do not counter. Ask, what made you say that? And then do the hardest part of all. Stop talking and let the silence you already learned to hold do the rest of the work for you. There is a second version of this weapon, quieter than the question, and just as effective. Instead of asking what is happening, you name what is happening. You say it plainly, without judgment, almost like a doctor reading a chart out loud. It sounds like you are really angry about this, or it seems like something bigger than this conversation is going on. Negotiators call this emotion labeling, and it looks, at first glance, like the softest possible move you could make in a confrontation. It is actually one of the sharpest. Naming a person's emotional state out loud, calmly and without mockery, tends to lower the intensity of that emotion almost immediately, because most people who are escalating are secretly waiting for someone to notice how upset they actually are. The moment you notice it for them, out loud, part of the reason for the escalation disappears, because the escalation was partly a demand to be seen, and you just answered that demand without giving up a single inch of ground. Here is what makes labeling so different from sympathizing or apologizing, and this distinction matters. You are not agreeing that they are right. You are not saying sorry for something you did not do. You are simply describing what you observe, the way a strategist reads a battlefield, cold and accurate, without becoming part of the weather themselves. It sounds like you feel disrespected right now. That single sentence can do more to lower a shouting voice than 10 minutes of arguing about who started it, because arguing about who started it keeps both people in the storm. Naming the storm calmly from outside it is how you stay dry while everyone else gets soaked. Here is the uncomfortable truth this entire video has been circling. Most people think self-control under pressure is about suppressing emotion, gritting your teeth, forcing a fake calm while your insides are on fire. That is not what any of this has been describing. Every technique here, the silence, the refusal to over-explain, the shift from victim to strategist, the discipline of listening instead of talking, the label and the question that turn pressure back on its source, all of it depends on feeling the provocation fully and choosing your response anyway. Machiavelli never asked anyone to stop being human. He asked them to stop being controlled by whoever knew how to provoke them fastest. The loudest person in the room is not dangerous. They already showed you exactly where their strings are, because you watched someone else pull them in real time. The dangerous one is quiet, breathing evenly, asking one precise question, and walking out of the room having given away nothing and learned everything. That is not coldness. That is command, and command is available to anyone willing to build it in private before they ever need it in public. Somewhere between the person who explodes at every provocation and the person who never feels anything at all, there is a narrower path that almost nobody talks about. The path of a person who feels everything and still chooses, on purpose, what to do with it. That is not a personality you were born with. It is a discipline you build the same way a general builds an army, in the quiet stretches, long before the battle actually arrives. So here is the question worth sitting with, and worth answering in the comments below. Think about the last confrontation that actually got to you, the one where you said something you regretted, or went silent in a way that felt like defeat instead of strategy. What would have changed if you had asked one question instead? Write it below, because the answer you give yourself in that comment might be more useful than anything in this video. And if this way of thinking is one you want more of, subscribe, because this channel exists to keep dismantling the patterns that quietly run your decisions, before you even notice them making the choice for you.